The night my husband told me my mother was not his problem, I did not cry, I did not raise my voice, and I did not throw the glass of iced tea sitting beside my plate, even though every person at that dinner table deserved to hear it shatter. I simply looked at Mark Whitmore, the man I had loved for 11 years and been married to for 7, and smiled at him with the kind of calm that only comes when something inside you has finally gone quiet. My name is Rachel Whitmore. I was 42 years old that spring, a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, assigned to medical logistics out of Norfolk, Virginia, and, for most of my marriage, Mark's family had treated my work like a polite hobby with uniforms. They knew I wore rank. They knew I traveled when the Navy called. They knew I spent late nights building supply plans, reviewing casualty projections, tracking surgical kits, blood storage units, field hospital inventories, and emergency medical routes most people would never think about until the moment they were bleeding and praying someone like me had done her job correctly. But at Patricia Whitmore's Sunday dinner table, I was not Lieutenant Commander Whitmore. I was Mark's wife, the quiet one who brought lemon bars, helped clear plates, and never corrected anyone when they praised Mark for generosity he had never earned. The house smelled of roasted garlic, buttered rolls, and Patricia's expensive candles, the kind she bought in pairs, and complained about afterward, as if hardship had a lavender scent. Howard sat at the head of the table with his old Navy ball cap hanging on the chair behind him, though he had served only 4 years, and spoke of it like a lifetime of sacrifice. Patricia sat beside him, straight-backed and polished, her silver bracelet tapping softly against her wineglass every time she lifted it. Lauren, Mark's younger sister, sat across from me scrolling through her phone with one hand and eating with the other. Her teenage son Caleb slouched beside her, earbuds hidden under his hair. Mark sat to my right, charming and relaxed, the way he always looked when his family was gathered around him like an audience waiting for his next good deed. "Your brother saved us again this month," Patricia said, smiling at Lauren as she passed the potatoes. "I told Howard I don't know what we would do without Mark. That house payment would swallow us whole if he didn't step in." Mark gave a modest little shrug, the one I had watched him practice without ever admitting he practiced it. "Mom, come on. You don't have to make it a thing." "It is a thing," Howard said, pointing his fork in Mark's direction like he was saluting him with silverware. "A man takes care of his family. That's what he does." I looked down at my plate and cut a piece of chicken slowly, carefully, because my hand knew things my face had learned not to show. The house payment Howard was talking about came from my personal account on the 5th of every month, not Mark's. The insurance premium Lauren forgot about until 2 days before it was due came from my account too. Caleb's summer robotics program, Patricia's dental bill, the emergency plumbing repair, the veterans banquet donation Mark had stood up and accepted applause for last November, all of it had passed through my hands quietly while Mark stood in the warm light of gratitude. I had not corrected them then because I told myself family peace was worth more than credit. I told myself marriage meant supporting the people attached to the person you loved. I told myself that Mark probably meant to tell them one day. There are so many lies a woman will tell herself when the truth would require her to change the shape of her whole life. My phone buzzed in my lap just as Patricia began explaining how the Homeowners Association was raising fees again. I glanced down and saw my mother's name. For 1 second, I considered ignoring it. My mother, Ellen, never called during dinner unless she had already tried not to need me. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway where Patricia kept framed family photos arranged by importance. Mark in uniform from years ago in the center, Lauren and Caleb on either side, Howard shaking hands with some local councilmen, and me appearing only once in a wedding photo, half hidden behind a vase of artificial white roses. "Mom?" I said softly. Her breath came through the phone unevenly, too careful. "Rachel, sweetheart, I'm sorry to bother you. I know it's Sunday dinner." My chest tightened before she even said the rest. "It's fine, what happened?" There was a pause, and I could hear the television low in the background, my father probably pretending not to listen from his recliner. "The cardiologist moved the procedure up. He thinks waiting another month is too risky. Medicare is covering part of it, but the hospital called about the out-of-pocket amount and I just..." She stopped, embarrassed by needing help from the daughter she had spent her whole life trying not to burden. "How much?" I asked. "Rachel, I hate asking. How much, Mom?" "A little over $6,000 after the payment plan starts. We can manage some of it, but not all before the date." I closed my eyes. $6,000. Less than 3 months of what had been leaving my account to keep Mark's family comfortable enough to mistake comfort for independence. "I'll handle it," I said. "Don't worry about it tonight. Tell Dad I love him." Your father doesn't want you doing too much. Dad never wants anyone doing too much. That's his whole personality. She gave a tiny laugh, and the sound nearly broke me because it was full of relief she was trying to hide. When I returned to the dining room, Mark was telling Caleb about how responsibility meant showing up for people before they had to ask. I sat down beside him and looked at the plate I no longer wanted. Patricia glanced at me. "Everything all right?" "My mother called," I said, keeping my voice even. "My father's heart procedure was moved up. They need some help with the hospital costs this month, so I'm going to take care of it." I did not ask permission. I said it plainly, the way I would say I was stopping for gas or signing a form. For 7 years, money had left my account for the Whitmores without a family vote, without a discussion, without anyone wondering whether my parents had ever needed anything too. Mark's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The shift in him was small but immediate, like a door locking from the other side. "How much help?" he asked. "Enough to get them through the first payment." Patricia lowered her eyes to her plate, but not before I saw the faint tightening around her mouth. Howard leaned back as if the conversation had become financial weather he did not like. Lauren finally looked up from her phone, suddenly interested. Mark set his fork down with a soft click. "Rachel," he said, using the calm voice that meant he had already decided he was right. "Your mother is your responsibility. My family is mine." I stared at him, waiting for the sentence to correct itself, waiting for some sign that he heard what he had just said in a room full of people whose bills I had been paying for years. He did not. He leaned back slightly, growing more confident in the silence. "Your money is yours. My money is mine. We've always kept things separate for a reason." The table went still, not shocked still, agreeing still. Patricia dabbed her mouth with her napkin, relieved not to have to speak first. Howard gave one slow nod, the kind men give when they think a hard truth has finally been said. Lauren looked back down at her phone, because when the cruelty is not aimed at you, it is easy to call it normal. I looked at all of them one by one, these people who had eaten from my hand without ever looking at it closely enough to know whose hand it was. Then I looked at Mark, my husband, sitting there in the glow of his mother's candles, wrapped in a reputation I had purchased for him, one automatic transfer at a time. And in that exact moment, I understood something with such clean certainty that it almost felt like mercy. Mark had not insulted my mother. He had given me the rule. He had said it out loud, in front of witnesses, with his family listening. "Your money is yours. My money is mine." I picked up my fork again, though I had no appetite left, and cut another piece of chicken as if the world had not just rearranged itself. "Okay," I said softly. "That's fair." Mark relaxed immediately, mistaking my calm for surrender, the way he had mistaken my silence for agreement all these years. Patricia began talking about the garden club fundraiser. Howard asked Caleb about school. Lauren complained about her insurance renewal, not looking at me once, and I sat there through the rest of dinner smiling when I was supposed to smile, passing dishes when someone asked, helping Patricia rinse plates afterward while she praised Mark again for being such a devoted son. By the time we drove home through the dark Virginia streets, Mark reached across the console and squeezed my hand like a man who believed he had restored order. "You got quiet back there," he said. "I was thinking," I answered, watching the headlights slide across the road ahead. "About what?" I turned my face toward the window so he would not see the first honest smile I had worn all night. "About money," I said. He laughed once, light and careless. "Don't overthink it, we're fine." We were not fine. He just didn't know it yet. Because by the time we pulled into our driveway, I had already decided that if my money was mine, then, for the first time in 7 years, I was going to start acting like it. And the Whitmore family had exactly 30 days before they found out what my silence had been paying for. I did not sleep that night, not really. I lay beside Mark in the dark and listened to him breathe with the easy rhythm of a man who believed dinner had ended when dessert plates were cleared, who believed a sentence could be cruel only if the person hearing it had the courage to object in the moment. He turned once, mumbled something about an early briefing, and drifted deeper into sleep, while I stared at the ceiling and felt the shape of 7 years pressing down on me with a weight I had never allowed myself to measure. That was the thing about being useful for too long. People stopped seeing the effort. They stopped seeing the sacrifice. They stopped seeing the person and began trusting the system, as if money simply appeared when Patricia needed the house payment covered, when Lauren forgot insurance again, when Howard's pride would not let him admit the pension did not stretch as far as his opinions. Around 1:37 inches the morning, I slipped out of bed carefully, not because I feared waking Mark, but because I no longer wanted to give him even the small intimacy of knowing I was restless. I went downstairs to the little office off the laundry room, the one Patricia once called Rachel's paperwork cave, with a laugh that made everyone else laugh too. And I turned on the desk lamp. The room filled with a soft yellow glow, catching the edges of binders, Navy folders, deployment manuals, and the framed photograph of my parents standing beside me the day I received my promotion to lieutenant commander. My father had been thinner then, but smiling so hard it looked painful. My mother had cried openly, not because she understood the rank fully, but because she understood I had earned something nobody had handed me. I touched the frame once before opening my laptop. At first, I told myself I only wanted to confirm the numbers. That was the polite lie. The truth was that Mark had said my money was mine, and before I could take it back, I needed to look directly at every place I had allowed it to disappear. I logged into my personal checking account, the one I had kept since before our wedding, the one Mark never asked about because separate finances had always been convenient for him as long as my separate money kept solving his family's shared emergencies. I downloaded 7 years of statements, month by month, quarter by quarter, all the quiet proof of a marriage whose generosity had been wearing the wrong name tag. Then I opened a spreadsheet. I have built casualty resupply models under pressure. I have calculated how many IV kits, surgical gloves, units of plasma, antibiotics, trauma dressings, and portable oxygen systems a field medical team might burn through in 48 hours under conditions most civilians would rather not imagine. Numbers have never frightened me. What frightened me that night was realizing how often I had chosen not to add these particular numbers because some part of me already knew what they would say. The first transfer was easy to find. $1,400 every month to Patricia and Howard's mortgage servicer. Beginning 6 months after they refinanced the Virginia Beach house they insisted they could afford. Mark had told me it would only be temporary. Just until Dad's pension adjustment kicks in, he had said, kissing my forehead like I was kind for believing him. The adjustment came and went. The transfer stayed. The next category was Lauren. $612.48 every month for health insurance and auto coverage bundled through a plan she claimed she was going to take over after she got back on her feet. That phrase had lasted longer than some military contracts I had managed. Then Caleb's school fees, summer robotics camp, 2 laptops, emergency dental work, and the private tutoring Lauren called an investment in his future. While never once asking whose future I was postponing to pay for it, I kept going. $3,850 for Howard and Patricia's roof repair after a storm damaged the backside of the house. I remembered Patricia standing at Easter brunch that year, telling her sister that Mark had really stepped up as a son. I remembered Mark looking modestly down at his coffee, while I sat 3 chairs away with the contractor's invoice still sitting in my email. $5,000 for the Veterans Outreach Banquet, where Mark had stood on a small stage in a navy blazer and accepted a plaque from a local charity for being a pillar of family support. I had clapped that night. God help me, I had clapped. There were smaller charges too, the kind that looked harmless alone and obscene together. Utility overages, grocery deliveries when Patricia was too overwhelmed, a replacement water heater, property tax shortfalls, Lauren's missed co-payments, Howard's truck repair, Caleb's band trip, holiday gifts Mark signed both our names to even when he had not contributed $1. By 3:12 inches the morning, the spreadsheet had become something more than math. It was a map of every boundary I had failed to draw because I mistook endurance for love. I totaled it once and stared at the number. Then I cleared the formula and totaled it again because the first result seemed too large to belong to my life. The second answer was worse because it matched. $212,643 over 7 years, not counting interest I could have earned, retirement contributions I could have increased, trips I never took with my own parents, repairs my father postponed, a little comforts my mother waved away because she did not want to ask too much. I sat back in the chair and felt nothing at first. That surprised me. I expected rage, maybe tears, maybe the kind of trembling people describe when betrayal finally becomes undeniable. Instead, I felt a cold, clean stillness, the same kind I felt during emergency drills when alarms were sounding and everyone else was waiting for the first person to panic. Panic wastes time. Clarity saves it. I opened my email and wrote to Commander Ellis, the financial counselor assigned through our base support office, a woman with sharp eyes and the kind of calm voice that made chaos feel temporary. I need to restructure recurring personal transfers effective immediately, I typed. Family-related payments. No emergency, but I want everything documented cleanly. I hovered over the send button, then added one more line. I also need to establish a separate medical support account for my parents. I sent it before I could soften the language. Her reply came at 5:04 a.m. While the first gray light was beginning to press against the blinds. I can see you at 0900. Bring statements, account lists, and any automatic payment authorizations. I looked at the screen and almost laughed because of course she responded like a logistics officer. Bring the documents, define the mission, execute. At 8:30, Mark came downstairs in uniform pants and a white undershirt, rubbing his jaw and asking why coffee was not made yet. For 7 years, that question would have made me stand automatically. That morning, I looked up from the printed statements stacked neatly beside my laptop and said, I haven't made any. He blinked, mildly annoyed, but too rushed to turn it into a fight. Long night? He asked. Very informative, I said. He did not ask what I meant. That was always Mark's weakness. He only asked questions when he already liked the answer. 9:0. I was sitting across from Commander Ellen, with my folders arranged by category. She did not interrupt, as I explained the recurring transfers, the history, the dinner conversation, my father's procedure, and Mark's sentence repeated word for word, because some sentences deserve to be preserved exactly as evidence. When I finished, she folded her hands and looked at me, not with pity, which I would have hated, but with professional respect. Do you want to reduce these payments or stop them? She asked. That was the first moment anyone had asked me what I wanted. Not what Mark needed, not what Patricia expected, not what Lauren depended on, not what would keep Sunday dinners peaceful. What I wanted. I looked down at the spreadsheet, at the years of quiet loyalty that had been converted into someone else's reputation, and I heard Mark again at that candlelit table. Your money is yours, my money is mine. Stop them, I said. All of them. Commander Ellis nodded once and turned to her keyboard. Then we stopped them cleanly. For the next hour, we moved through everything. Mortgage assistance canceled, insurance drafts canceled, utility backups removed, charity card authorization revoked, emergency access disabled, new account opened for my parents' medical needs, alerts redirected to my phone only, documentation saved, confirmation numbers printed. No drama, no shouting, no slam doors, just one system being dismantled because the woman maintaining it had finally withdrawn permission. When it was done, Commander Ellis slid the final page across the desk for my signature. They may not notice everything immediately, she said, but within 30 days they'll know. I signed my name slowly, clearly, every letter steadier than the last. Good, I said, and meant it. When I walked out into the bright Norfolk morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother thanking me again for helping with Dad's procedure, apologizing twice in 3 lines because gratitude and guilt had always tangled together in her. I called her before I reached the parking lot. Mom, I said, watching sailors cross the pavement in the distance. All of us carrying things nobody else could see. Don't apologize to me again. Not for Dad, not for needing help, not for anything. She went quiet. Rachel, are you all right? I looked down at the folder in my hand, thick with proof, and felt the first breath of something almost like freedom. I'm getting there, I said. And for the first time in 7 years, that felt true. The first missed payment did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a small, polite email at 8:11 on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in a Navy conference room reviewing emergency surgical supply routes for a training scenario off the Atlantic coast. That was the strange thing about consequences. People imagined them as explosions, but most of the time they began as notifications, subject lines, automated reminders, and red lettering on statements nobody had bothered to read when someone else was quietly making sure they never mattered. My phone buzzed once on the table beside my folder. I glanced down only long enough to see Patricia's name flash across the screen, then turned my attention back to the logistics map projected on the wall. If the forward surgical team loses refrigerated transport for blood products after hour 12, we need a secondary route through Portsmouth and an alternate generator staged before the convoy moves, I said, pointing to the marker line. Across from me, 2 lieutenants nodded and started adjusting the model. No one in that room knew that in another part of Virginia, Patricia Whitmore was probably staring at a mortgage portal that no longer looked as friendly as it had for the past 7 years. I let her call go to voicemail, not because I was cruel, Because for once, her emergency was not going to outrank my duty, my work, or my peace. By lunch, she had called 3 more times and left 2 messages, each one sharpening from confusion into accusation. Rachel, sweetheart, I think there's been some kind of banking issue. The house payment draft didn't go through. Could you check with Mark? The second message dropped the sweetheart. Rachel, I need you to call me back. This is serious. We depend on that arrangement, and I don't appreciate being ignored. Arrangement? I listened to that word twice while sitting in my car outside the base medical supply annex. For 7 years, nobody had called it an arrangement when my account was feeding it. It had been family then, generosity then, Mark stepping up then. Only when the money disappeared did it become an arrangement, something formal enough to accuse me of breaking. I did not call her back until after work. After I had stopped by the pharmacy to pick up my father's new medication, after I had spoken to my mother and told her the first hospital payment had cleared. When I finally returned Patricia's call, I was standing in my kitchen with a glass of water in my hand and my shoes still on. She answered before the first ring finished. Rachel, thank God. There is a problem with the house payment. There isn't a problem, I said. I stopped it. The silence on her end was so complete I could hear the hum of my refrigerator. You stopped it? Yes. Without telling us? Her voice rose, not enough to become shouting, but enough to reveal the entitlement underneath all that polished sweetness. Patricia, Mark explained the family rules very clearly at dinner. My mother is my responsibility, his family is his. My money is mine. That was different. People always said that when fairness arrived at their door dressed as inconvenience. How was it different? I asked. Another silence. I pictured her sitting in the sunroom she liked to call modest, surrounded by furniture she complained was old but never old enough to replace with her own money. Rachel, we are not strangers. We are your family. My father was family too, I said. No one at that table seemed to remember that. She inhaled sharply, wounded not by what she had done, but by the fact that I had named it. I think you and Mark need to discuss this. Mark already discussed it, I said. I'm simply respecting his decision. I ended the call before she could turn panic into theater. 15 minutes later, Mark came home with his tie already loosened and anger walking ahead of him like a separate person. He dropped his keys on the counter harder than necessary. What the hell is going on with my mother? I looked up from the paperwork I was sorting at the kitchen island. You'll have to be more specific. Don't do that, Rachel. She says you canceled the house payment. I did. His face tightened. Confusion and disbelief fighting for space. Why would you do that? I almost admired the question. Not because it was innocent, but because it revealed how deeply he had believed the old world would hold. Because my money is mine, I said. Your words. You're punishing them because of one conversation. No, I'm following the rule you stated in front of them. That's not what I meant. I know, I said, and I saw the sentence land. He had meant my money was mine when I wanted to use it for my parents. He had not meant my money was mine when his parents needed it. That was the whole architecture of our marriage exposed in one small correction. His phone rang before he could answer. Patricia. He looked at the screen, then at me, then stepped into the living room with the hunched shoulders of a man walking toward a fire he had accidentally started but still expected someone else to extinguish. I could hear pieces of his voice from the kitchen. Mom, calm down. No, I didn't know she was going to. I said I'll talk to her. Please don't get Dad worked up. Dad was already worked up. Howard called 20 minutes later, and Mark took that call in the hallway, lower and more defensive. No, she's not trying to humiliate you. Dad, I know. I understand the deadline. I said I'll handle it. That phrase, repeated twice in one evening, almost made me laugh. I'll handle it. Mark had built an entire identity on those 3 words while I did the handling. By the next morning, Lauren joined the chorus. Her text arrived at 6:42, written with the moral confidence of someone whose premiums had been paid by another person long enough to mistake dependency for injustice. I don't know what you're trying to prove, Rachel, but my insurance payment bounced and Caleb has an appointment next week. This is really unfair. I read it while drinking coffee I had made only for myself. For a moment, I considered sending her the 7-year total. Instead, I wrote, "You should speak with your brother. He said his family is his responsibility." 3 dots appeared, vanished, appeared again, then nothing. By the end of the week, the machine that had once operated quietly through my account began making noise everywhere else. Patricia received a late notice. Howard's truck repair card. the one I had been quietly covering after he called it a temporary cash flow issue, was declined for an automatic draft. Lauren sent Mark screenshots of her insurance portal, each message more frantic than the last. Caleb called me once, which hurt more than the others because he was only 16 and embarrassed. "Aunt Rachel, Mom said maybe you forgot about my program deposit." I closed my eyes and softened my voice. "I didn't forget, honey. This is something your mom and Uncle Mark need to talk about." "Is everyone mad?" he asked. "Adults get confused when money changes," I said, because it was the kindest true thing I could offer him. That night, Mark stood in our bedroom doorway while I folded laundry and said, "They're coming over Saturday." I placed one of his undershirts into a neat square. "Who is?" "My parents. Lauren, too. We need to sit down as a family and work this out." I looked at him then, really looked. His hair was still damp from the shower, his face tired, his confidence bruised but not gone. Somewhere inside him, he still believed a group conversation would pressure me back into obedience. He still believed the weight of their disappointment could do what his anger had not. "All right," I said. He blinked, surprised by how easily I agreed. "All right? Yes. You'll talk? I'll talk." Relief moved across his face too quickly. He did not notice that I did not say I would apologize. On Saturday morning, I woke before sunrise and went back into my office. I printed the spreadsheet, the transfer confirmations, the canceled drafts, the receipts, the donation acknowledgments, the contractor invoice, the insurance records, the robotics camp payment, the hospital payment for my father, and the email where Commander Ellis confirmed every recurring transfer had been stopped cleanly. I arranged them by category in a navy blue folder with tabs because even betrayal deserves organization when it is finally ready to be understood. At 2:03, Patricia, Howard, and Lauren arrived at our front door dressed as if they were attending a hearing where they had already decided the verdict. Patricia carried her purse with both hands. Howard walked in without greeting me. Lauren's eyes were red, but her jaw was hard. Mark hovered near the fireplace, trying to look like a mediator instead of the reason we were all there. They sat in my living room, the same living room where Patricia had once praised Mark for helping with her roof while I served coffee from a tray. No one asked about my father. Not one person. Patricia began first, voice trembling with practiced injury. "Rachel, I don't understand how you could just cut us off." I let the words sit for a moment. Then I reached beside my chair, lifted the navy blue folder, and placed it on the coffee table between us. The sound it made was soft, but every eye in the room moved toward it. "Before anyone calls me selfish," I said, opening the first tab, "you should know what I've actually been paying for." There are moments in a family when everyone in the room knows something important has shifted, but no one is brave enough to name it first. That was how my living room felt after I opened the navy blue folder on the coffee table. Patricia sat with her purse clutched in both hands, her knuckles pale against the leather, still wearing the expression of a woman who had arrived prepared to be wounded and was beginning to understand she might have come to the wrong trial. Howard stood near the fireplace instead of sitting, arms crossed, chin lifted, trying to look like authority, even though his eyes had locked onto the first printed page. Lauren sat on the edge of the couch with one knee bouncing, her phone face down beside her for once, because even she understood this was not a conversation she could scroll through. Mark remained by the mantel, close enough to his family to look loyal, far enough from me to pretend he was neutral. I looked at each of them once, then lowered my eyes to the first tab. "Mortgage assistance," I said. My voice sounded calm even to me, not soft, not sharp, just clear. $1,400 a month, beginning in September 7 years ago. Mark told me it would be temporary until Howard's pension adjustment and Patricia's part-time consulting check stabilized. It never stopped. Patricia's mouth opened slightly. "That was Mark," she said almost reflexively, as if the name itself could protect her from the paper in front of her. "Mark said he handled that." "No," I said. "Mark said he handled it. I paid it." I turned the page and slid the statement across the table so she could see my name, my account, the same recurring transfer moving out on the 5th of every month like a quiet pulse. Patricia did not touch the page. Howard did. He stepped forward, picked it up, and stared at it with the angry concentration of a man trying to find a flaw in reality. "This doesn't mean what you think it means," he said. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Men like Howard had a way of treating documents as opinions when the documents made them uncomfortable. "It means exactly what it says," I answered. The payments came from my personal account. I moved to the next tab. Lauren's insurance. $612.48 a month, adjusted twice over the years. Health, auto, and supplemental coverage after the divorce. Lauren's face changed then. Not dramatically, but enough. Her lips pressed together and her eyes flickered toward Mark. "You told me you added me under some family plan," she said to him. Mark's jaw tightened. "It was complicated." "It wasn't complicated," I said, turning another page. "It was automatic. That's why nobody had to think about it." The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I continued because stopping would have given them room to recover. Caleb's robotics camp, 2 laptops, the emergency dental bill, the car repair last winter, the utility overages when Patricia and Howard's heating bills jumped, Howard's truck repair, the property tax shortfall, the water heater, the roof repair after the storm, $5,000 to the Veterans Outreach Banquet last November. I paused there because that one still had a taste. That donation was made on my card. Mark accepted the plaque. Patricia looked at Mark again, slower this time, not confused now, measuring. I remembered that banquet too clearly. The navy tablecloths, the folding stage, the gold letters on the program, Mark standing beneath them with his hand over his heart while the room applauded his commitment to family and service. I had sat at a back table beside 2 wives I barely knew, clapping because I thought loyalty meant helping him look like the man he wanted to be. "Rachel?" Mark said quietly, warning in his voice, as if my name could still pull me back into obedience. I did not look at him. "The total," I said, opening the final summary page, "is $212,643 over 7 years. That does not include interest, lost savings, retirement contributions, or anything I could have done for my own parents during that time." No one moved. Even Howard stopped pretending not to understand. Patricia's hand rose to her chest, not theatrically this time, but as if the number had physically entered her body and taken the breath out of her. Lauren whispered, "I didn't know it was that much." "None of you knew anything," I said, and somehow that made the room colder than anger would have. "Because none of you asked. You accepted the money, accepted the story, accepted Mark's modest little shrugs, and never once wondered why the woman sitting at your table every Sunday never got thanked for anything." Howard cleared his throat. "Now hold on. Family helps family. We didn't force you to do all this." "No," I said. "You didn't force me. You just built a family culture where Mark got praised for my sacrifice and I got called selfish the first time I wanted to help my father." That landed differently. I watched it hit each person in the room in separate ways. Patricia looked down. Lauren blinked too fast. Howard's mouth tightened. Mark finally stepped away from the mantel. "This is getting out of hand." "It got out of hand years ago," I said. "This is just the first time everyone can see it." Patricia lifted her eyes to me, and there was something fragile in them now, something almost frightened. "Rachel, why didn't you say something before?" It was the question I had asked myself all week, the one that sounded simple only to people who had benefited from my silence. I folded my hands in my lap, because every time I thought about saying something, I told myself keeping peace mattered more. I told myself you loved me in your own way. I told myself Mark would eventually give me credit without being forced. I told myself good wives don't count what they give. My voice stayed steady, but I felt the years moving under it. Then my father needed help, and your son looked me in the eye in front of all of you and said my mother was my responsibility. Not his. Not this family's. Mine. Patricia flinched. Howard looked toward the floor. Lauren said nothing. "So I counted." I finished. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his face flushed now. "You're making me look like a monster." For the first time that afternoon, I turned to him fully. "No, Mark. I'm making you visible." The words settled over him and I saw his anger flicker into panic. That was when I reached into the back of the folder and removed the banquet photograph. Mark on stage, smiling, holding the plaque. Me in the corner of the frame, half visible near the back table, I placed it beside the donation receipt. "This is what I mean," I said. "That room applauded you for a donation I made. Your mother cried that night because she was so proud of her son. Your father shook your hand. Lauren posted about you on Facebook. And I stood there watching my money become your character." Patricia's eyes filled then. "Mark," she said, barely above a whisper, "where did you tell us this money was coming from?" He did not answer. The old Mark would have. The old Mark would have found a charming explanation, a half-truth wrapped in concern. something about joint priorities or private marital decisions. But this Mark was trapped between paper and memory, between the family who adored him and the wife who had finally brought receipts. Howard's voice dropped low. "Son, answer your mother." Mark stared at the folder as if it had betrayed him personally. "I said it was from us," he muttered. "From our household. I said we were doing well enough to help." "Us?" I repeated. "There was no us in these payments. There was my account and your applause." Lauren covered her mouth with one hand. Patricia leaned back slowly, as if the couch had moved beneath her. Howard's face hardened, but not at me this time. For the first time since I had known him, his disappointment had found the correct target. "You let us believe you were carrying this family?" he said. Mark looked up, wounded and defensive. "I wanted you to be proud of me." The room absorbed that confession in a silence heavier than shouting, and for one dangerous second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered my mother apologizing for needing help with my father's heart procedure, while the Whitmores sat in candlelight discussing family loyalty over food I had helped buy. I closed the folder, not loudly, just enough to end the first part of the trial. "There's one more thing," I said. Every face turned back to me. "Next week, there's a formal recognition ceremony at Naval Station Norfolk. Mark knows about it as a community event. He does not know why my command asked me to attend." Mark's expression shifted immediately. "Rachel, what are you talking about?" I stood, holding the folder against my side. "For 7 years, you let your family think you were the person holding everything together. Next week, they're going to meet the version of me you never bothered to explain." The week before the ceremony moved through our house, with the strange quiet of a storm that had not yet decided where to break. Mark did not ask me about the folder again, and I did not offer him comfort by pretending the conversation had been smaller than it was. Patricia called twice, but I let both calls go to voicemail because I knew the difference now between an apology and a request disguised as one. Howard sent Mark one short message that I only saw because Mark left his phone on the kitchen counter while taking out the trash. "Your mother is devastated. Fix this. Not apologize. Not tell the truth. Fix this." That had always been the Whitmore family's language for discomfort. If something made them feel ashamed, someone else was expected to rearrange reality until the shame went away. Lauren surprised me by sending one text of her own. Not cruel this time, just shaken. "I didn't know, Rachel." I stared at those Gan stared at those 4 words. Gan stared at those 4 words for a long time. Not because they healed anything, but because they were the first words from that family that did not ask me for money, explanation, or obedience. I did not reply immediately. Some messages deserve silence, until you can answer them without carrying someone else's guilt for them. Meanwhile, life on base did what life on base always does. It kept moving. Supplies still had to be tracked, readiness reports still had to be updated, emergency routes still had to be tested, and young officers still came into my office thinking logistics meant clipboards until a casualty simulation showed them how quickly a missing pallet of sterile tubing could become the difference between survivable and not. On Monday morning, Captain Reeves called me into his office with a look on his face I recognized from award packets and administrative ambushes. He was a broad-shouldered man with a calm voice and a habit of tapping his pen twice before saying anything important. "Whitmore," he said, motioning toward the chair. "You received the final ceremony packet?" "Yes, sir," I said. "I did." "And you read the program?" I had. At 5:20 that morning, before Mark woke, while the coffee brewed and the house sat in the blue-gray quiet before daylight, my name was printed not under spouses, not under community acknowledgements, not beside Mark's volunteer committee, but under formal recognition. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Whitmore, Medical Logistics Readiness Division, for extraordinary leadership in emergency field hospital sustainment during Operation Harbor Shield. The words had sat on the page with a weight I had not expected. Not because I did not know what I had done. I knew exactly what I had done. I remembered the storm system that had delayed airlift support, the damaged refrigerated units, the blood products that would have expired if rerouted too late, the field surgical team requesting supplies faster than the standard chain could respond, the 48-hour window when everyone above me wanted reassurance and everyone below me needed answers. I remembered building the alternate route on 3 hours of sleep, calling in favors, pushing through approvals, moving inventory nobody thought could move that fast. I remembered one surgeon's voice over a secure line saying, "Whoever built this plan just bought us time." But I had folded that memory away with all the others because women like me learned early that if you spoke too proudly, someone would call it arrogance. and if you stayed quiet, someone else would take the room. Captain Reeves watched me with the kind of patience that meant he knew more than he was saying. You should know the Admiral intends to mention the community side of your work too. My jaw tightened slightly. Sir? He tapped the pen twice. The family support donations, emergency assistance patterns, the veterans outreach funding. Your name came up repeatedly when the committee reviewed long-term impact. Apparently half the community has benefited from something you did quietly. I felt my throat close in a way I had not prepared for. Some of that is complicated. Most things worth recognizing are, he said. But complicated is not the same as invisible. I left his office with the ceremony packet tucked under my arm and a feeling I could not name. It was not pride exactly. Pride felt too clean. This was heavier, more exposed, almost frightening. For 7 years, I had wanted one family to see what I had given. Now a room full of officers, sailors, spouses, donors, and local officials was going to see more than I had ever intended to show. That evening, Mark found the packet on the dining table where I had left it deliberately. Not hidden, not displayed, just present. He picked it up casually at first, then went still as he read past the event title. Why is your name here like this? He asked. I looked up from my laptop. Because I was invited. I know you were invited. I mean, why are you listed as an honoree? There it was again, the reflexive disbelief, the instinct to place me lower than the evidence in front of him. Because the Navy decided to honor my work. His face flushed. Don't make it sound like that. I just didn't realize this was about you. That's been a theme. He set the packet down too carefully. Rachel, I'm trying here. Trying to understand or trying to control how this looks? He rubbed both hands over his face. My parents are coming. Lauren too. After what happened Saturday, this could be awkward. It probably will be. Can we not turn this into another public humiliation? I closed my laptop slowly. Mark, I did not invite humiliation. I invited truth. If those feel the same to you, that's something you need to sit with. He looked away first. For a moment, I saw the boy beneath the husband, the son who had wanted applause so badly he borrowed money, credit, and character from his wife without asking. But pity no longer moved me the way it used to. Pity had been expensive. On Wednesday, Patricia called again, and this time I answered. Her voice was softer than usual, stripped of some of its polish. Mark says we should attend the ceremony. That's up to you. He says it would show unity. Of course he did. Unity was another Whitmore word that usually meant silence from me. Come if you want to come, Patricia. But I'm not managing anyone's feelings that day. She was quiet long enough that I almost thought the call had dropped. Your father, she said finally. How is he? I closed my eyes. It was late. It was small. It was not enough. But it was the first time she had asked. He's recovering. The first payment is handled. The procedure is scheduled. I'm glad, she said. The words sounded unfamiliar in her mouth, like she was learning a language she should have spoken years ago. Thank you, I said, and ended the call before either of us could make the moment more than it was. By Friday morning, my dress whites were pressed, my ribbons checked, my shoes polished until they caught the light. Mark stood in the bedroom doorway watching me align the last detail on my uniform jacket. Once, I would have asked if everything looked right. That morning I already knew. You look different, he said. No, I answered, fastening the jacket. You're just paying attention. The drive to Naval Station Norfolk was nearly silent. Patricia and Howard followed in their own car with Lauren and Caleb, who had asked if he could come after seeing the program online. Mark kept both hands on the wheel, glancing at me every few minutes as if he expected me to tell him what role to play. I gave him nothing. When we entered the reception hall, the air smelled of polished floors, coffee, and fresh flowers arranged beneath Navy flags. Officers stood in small groups. Spouses moved between tables. A large screen glowed at the front of the room, cycling through names and photographs of honorees. Mark stopped so suddenly that I nearly brushed his sleeve. There, larger than life, was my official portrait in uniform, my name beneath it, and the words he read in a whisper that sounded almost like fear. For extraordinary medical logistics leadership. Behind us, Patricia, Howard, and Lauren came to a stop too. No one spoke. No one needed to. For the first time since I had known them, the Whitmore family was looking at me before I looked back. The ceremony began with music, polished shoes, folded flags, and the kind of formal silence that makes every small movement feel louder than it should. I sat in the second row among the honorees. my dress whites crisp against the dark blue chairs. My hands resting calmly in my lap, even though I could feel Mark's family behind me like a weather system gathering pressure. Mark sat 2 seats away because protocol had placed me with the other recipients, not beside him, and that small separation seemed to trouble him more than any argument we had ever had. For years, he had stood at the center of every room where his family needed to admire someone, and I had stood near the edges, useful, quiet, available when the check arrived or the dishes needed clearing. But at Naval Station Norfolk, under the bright lights and the flags, the chairs had been arranged by truth instead of habit. Patricia sat behind me with Howard, Lauren, and Caleb. I did not turn around, but I could feel their attention on the back of my uniform, on my ribbons, on my name printed in the program. In a way, none of them could soften or explain away. The Admiral stepped to the podium after the opening remarks, a tall woman with silver hair, steady eyes, and a voice that carried without effort. She spoke first about service, not the kind that photographs well, but the kind that happens in planning rooms at midnight, on radios during storms, in supply corridors, in spreadsheets nobody claps for until the day those numbers keep people alive. I looked down briefly because I knew before she said my name that she was building the road toward it. There are officers whose work is visible because it is dramatic, she said. And there are officers whose work is invisible because it is done correctly. A small ripple of recognition moved through the audience. Today, we honor Lieutenant Commander Rachel Whitmore for extraordinary medical logistics leadership during Operation Harbor Shield, when her emergency sustainment plan preserved critical surgical capacity for a forward field hospital during a 48-hour disruption that could have cost lives. For 1 second, the room became soundless in the way only a crowded room can, not empty, but waiting. Then people began to turn toward me. I stood because that was what I had been trained to do, because my body knew protocol even when my heart had not decided what to feel. As I walked toward the stage, I did not look at Mark. I did not look at Patricia, or Howard, or Lauren. I kept my eyes on the Admiral, on the flag behind her, on the years of work that had brought me there long before my husband's lies were ever pulled into the light. The screen behind the podium changed to a map of the operation area, then to supply route diagrams, and finally a photograph of the field medical team I had supported. The Admiral explained how a storm system had grounded airlift for longer than command had projected, how refrigerated transport failure had threatened blood supplies, how surgical kits and antibiotics had been rerouted across 3 separate channels because the primary route collapsed. Lieutenant Commander Whitmore did not wait for ideal conditions, she said. She built a working answer under pressure. Because of her plan, the field hospital remained operational when it had every reason not to. Applause rose, strong and formal at first, then warmer, then larger, as several medical officers in the audience stood. I saw Captain Reeves stand, then the lieutenants from my division, then one of the surgeons from Harbor Shield, a man I had only spoken to over secure lines, stood and saluted me from the aisle. That was the moment my composure almost broke. Not because of the applause, but because of the memory of his voice months earlier saying, "Whoever built this plan just bought us time." Back then, time had meant blood kept cold, hands kept steady, wounds treated before they became losses. In that hall, time meant something else too. It meant the years I had given without being seen had not erased me. The Admiral handed me the commendation folder, shook my hand, and leaned slightly closer so only I could hear the first words. "Well earned, Commander." Then into the microphone she said, "Some people serve loudly." Lieutenant Commander Whitmore served when no one was watching. The hall rose then. Not everyone at once, but enough that the movement became unavoidable. Chairs shifted. Hands came together. A standing ovation rolled through the room like a tide, and only then did I look toward my family. Mark was pale, his hands frozen halfway together as if he had forgotten how applause worked when it was not for him. Patricia had one hand pressed to her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. Howard sat rigid, staring at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something between pride and shame, as though he had just realized both were possible at the same time. Lauren was crying openly, and Caleb, sweet Caleb, was standing with everyone else, clapping harder than anyone, his face full of the kind of uncomplicated admiration adults learn how to ruin. I returned to my seat to more applause, and Mark shifted as if he might reach for my hand. I placed both hands in my lap before he could. There were more awards after mine, more speeches, more photographs, but I barely heard them. I felt strangely quiet, not empty, not overwhelmed, just still. For years I had imagined that being seen would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like proof that I had existed the whole time, even when the people closest to me had acted as if my value began and ended with what I could quietly provide. After the ceremony, the reception hall filled with conversation. Officers approached me, surgeons thanked me, young logistics sailors asked questions with the bright intensity of people realizing their work mattered more than anyone had told them. Captain Reeves introduced me to a hospital commander who said, "Your model is being reviewed for broader readiness planning." I nodded, answered professionally, accepted congratulations, and tried not to look over my shoulder every time I felt the Whitmores nearby. Eventually, Patricia came first. Of course she did. Howard stood a few steps behind her, with Lauren and Caleb near the refreshment table. Mark lingered at the edge, unable to decide whether he was husband, defendant, or witness. Patricia stopped in front of me, smaller somehow than she had been in her own dining room. "Rachel," she said, and her voice trembled without performance this time. "I owe you an apology." I waited. I had learned not to rescue people from the discomfort of beginning badly. "I believed the story that made me feel best about my son," she continued, "and I ignored the woman who was actually helping us. I am ashamed of that." Howard cleared his throat, stepped beside her, and looked at the floor before looking at me. "I talked a lot about family loyalty," he said. "Didn't practice much of it toward you." Lauren wiped her cheeks with both hands. "I'm sorry for the things I said. I didn't know, but I also didn't ask, and that's on me." I looked at the three of them, and something in me softened. Not enough to erase the years, not enough to pretend apology was the same as repair, but enough to let the truth have a place to land. "Thank you," I said. "I'm not ready to say everything is fine, but thank you for saying it honestly." Caleb stepped forward then and hugged me without asking. The way teenagers do when they have decided emotion is more important than embarrassment. "You were awesome," he whispered. I laughed, and that was the first laugh of the day that felt fully mine. Mark waited until the others drifted away before approaching. His eyes were red, though whether from shame, fear, or loss, I could not tell. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I didn't know how much of you I was taking." I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said. "You knew you were taking. You just didn't know everyone would find out." He flinched, but he did not argue. That mattered, but not enough to heal it. "Can we talk when we get home?" he asked. "We can talk," I said, "but not about how to make this disappear. Not anymore." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw him understand that the woman standing in front of him was not waiting for permission to decide what came next. That evening, I drove to my parents' house instead of going straight home. My father was sitting in his recliner, recovering slowly, stubbornly, pretending the blanket over his knees was only there because my mother was dramatic. My mother had watched the ceremony live stream on her tablet and cried so much she claimed the screen went blurry. I sat between them at the kitchen table while she served soup, and my father tapped the commendation folder with one finger like he was afraid to smudge it. "Always knew you were something," he said gruffly. "You just took your time letting everybody else catch up." I smiled and reached for his hand. Later that night, my phone lit up with Mark's name. I let it ring once, then turned it face down and stayed at the table while my mother talked about planting tomatoes and my father complained about hospital food. For the first time in years, I did not feel pulled in half between the family that needed me quietly and the family that loved me openly. I had spent 7 years funding someone else's version of honor. Now I knew better. Honor was not applause stolen in a banquet hall. It was not a husband's borrowed reputation or a family's comfortable lie. Honor was doing the work when no one watched, telling the truth when everyone finally did, and choosing, at last, not to abandon yourself just because other people had grown used to your silence. If you've stayed with Rachel's story this far, tell me what you think. Should she give Mark a chance to rebuild the marriage, or has too much already been broken? Drop your thoughts below, and let me know where you're watching from tonight.